Today, he'll speak about achieving Canadian Arctic sovereignty through space. Everybody, please welcome Dan Kerry. You can put your laptop here. Thank you. Where's the clicker?
Well, thanks everybody, and great to see so many people here today. And don't worry, when General Horner mentioned that value chain, I am going to focus on that today, so you'll see that in a little bit more depth. And I've been here to speak a little bit about the point of view that I wrote last year. And when I say wrote, I actually wrote with many people in this room. It was a collaborative effort between space companies, Government of Canada, and Deloitte. And the reason why I mentioned it was a year ago, quite a bit has changed in that year. So as I go through this talk, I will refer to what has changed, what's positively changed, and what is still happening around Arctic sovereignty. I'm also going to start reminding people a little bit about the Arctic. I've never actually been to the Canadian Arctic, but I know people who have. General T-Bear describes it as almost flying to the moon, because you just fly up to places like Alert, and you just see white and no human civilization, and it feels very, very foreign. And it represents around 40% of Canada's landmass, and it is only home to about 150,000 people, so less than 1%. So this vast, cold, desolate area where infrastructure is hard actually necessitates the need for space and space assets to look after things such as domain awareness, communications, and sustainability around here. And I also want to touch a little bit around sovereignty. And sovereignty that General Horner mentioned earlier is the ability to control your own destiny, the ability to rely on Canada and Canada products rather than those that others. So we'll touch around what we mean by sovereignty as well as we go through this presentation. So I'm going to start by showing the map. I know many of you have seen this map before. And what is key about this map is we can see Russia on one side and we can see Canada and the US on the other side. And what is happening with climate change is we're beginning to see the Arctic Ocean opening up, and critically opening up more on the Russian side, which is also with their build of infrastructure, both military and commercial. And you're going to be able to see shipping routes, military activities, and possibly tourism. The Canadian side with that landmass is probably not going to melt as quickly, but that still means that we're going to see a very dynamic change in the Arctic here. So as it opens up, you're seeing adversaries and near-term adversaries begin to look about what the Arctic can provide for them. So the Arctic is, in addition to fish stocks, is also about natural resources, water, those rare minerals. So you're having adversarial and near-adversarial nations enviously looking at the Arctic. And with climate change, that opening up. Secondly, in the geopolitical, we're seeing how our evolving relationship with the United States is changing. Oh. No, that's great, because there is the picture of the Arctic. I imagine many of you had visualized it, but yeah, great point. You can see I'm excited to present this. So yeah, what I was trying to say is you can see the Russians on that side and Canada on this side. And what you're going to be able to see with climate change is this Arctic Ocean opening up for trade, commercial, leisure, and military. And with that as well, to the south, you're seeing a different relationship with the United States. So Canada no longer lives in this safe house. It no longer has the protection it has for years with a superpower, a friendly superpower beneath us, and a frozen north to the above. Though what has also changed in the last year is actually an investment in space. So, and I'll click on. So we're beginning to recognize the increasing importance of the Arctic, and two major things have happened since I wrote this paper. First of all is the stand-up of the Defence Investment Agency. And why this is important, this is about the speeding up of procurement, and we're seeing many examples in this room of how that's speeding up to strengthen our national security and our sovereign capabilities, particularly those connected with the Arctic. And secondly, we saw earlier this year the release of the Defence Industrial Strategy, which talk about that build, partner, buy. And that reinforced the Arctic as critical to Canada's sovereignty and national security, and a secure the North message for equipment, infrastructure, and collaboration with those northern Indigenous communities and our allies. And beyond that, we actually saw some notable and noted investments. First of all, we saw the Northern Operational Support Hubs. This is a 20-year, multi-billion-dollar program that is going to set up infrastructure, logistics, air operations in working with those local communities to sustain a deliberate presence there. From the previous presentation, you saw what the old looked like, and now you're going to see more investment in there. And that is going to be that deliberate presence in there in the Arctic. And then we talk about space and space assets. We're familiar with NORAD modernization and Arctic over-the-horizon radar, which will give us that much more dynamic view of intergalactic ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles that could come over, and the ability to detect and have domain awareness and the early warning system from that. We also saw very recently about the Enhanced Satellite Communication Project, or ESCAPE, where two of our major space primes are working together to take something from options analysis further into definition. And this is about military SATCOM, or military satellite communications, to provide that secure, resilient connectivity in those higher regions to protect the Arctic. And then, of course, while we're here today, we saw that commitment for sovereign launch capability with everything from the budget, announcing spaceports, space infrastructure, and rocket companies. So what we're seeing is that the recognition of the Arctic and the importance of it for Canadian sovereignty. This is the space value chain that General Horner referred to earlier. And in order to understand the sovereignty, we need to understand where we sit in this space value chain. And this is a bit of a life cycle of activities that are going to enable us to be committed at every stage of the space ecosystem. So it starts with conceive. This is the ideas phase. This is those concepts, those business ideas, whether it be commercial, scientific, or military, about starting things up. And then it's the design phase. This is when you're taking things from early technical readiness levels, beginning to test them, testing spacecraft, testing satellites, and this is where you typically would see those startups and those universities working together to design something that meets those concepts in the conceive stage. Then build. Critically, as General Horner referred to, we need to build stuff here in Canada. This year, we've seen a number of expansions around the development of build satellites, build launch systems, build launch capabilities, and that ground infrastructure necessary. And then that doesn't really work unless you have the ability to launch. Having the ability to launch the stuff that you have built and the stuff that you have designed is critical, because otherwise what you have up there can be taken out. There's a finite number. If you have launch, you decide when and how much you can launch there, and you're no longer reliant on others. That is a critical part of sovereignty, which has been a gap that General Horner mentioned earlier, and why we are here today. And then once our satellites or our systems are up there, we need to be able to operate them. So this is about how we're going to harvest that data from space down to Earth, and that will help us communicate, navigate, and provide information about minerals, climate change, as well as defense. And then there's the ability to maintain those space systems as they go through their life for upgrades. Upgrades can include things such as cyber protection, as our adversaries are also looking for space capability and taking us over. And then finally, there's that kind of recovery stage. And I know there are firms here in Ottawa that are actually looking to remove some of that space debris and create that sustainable thing. And this all is supported by this learning curve that we're in. So if we're in every element of this space ecosystem, we can be truly sovereign. And these are then powered by those that are enabled within the ecosystem. We have many people representing space companies here today, the large space primes, the startup, the small and medium ones, the collaboration with government agencies. I focused quite a lot on defense. There's naturally the CSA. We heard about Transport Canada and the policies that are going to be setting up to enable launch capabilities. We have ISED. We have many other government departments that are putting those demand signals up there and the requirements up there for us to meet. We then have Canadians, and when I mean Canadians, I think we've seen a real interest and an acceptance of both the spending in defense and a real interest in what's happening in space. I watched the launch and the splashdown with my young children, and they were super, super excited to see it, and that's a reason to celebrate, and also puts the importance of space, both be exploration and utilization, back in the Canadian psyche. We also have academia, again, critical throughout the space value chain, as they're the ones that are driving these conceived, driving the design, getting involved in build as well. Then we have funders. None of this would be possible unless we start to have private equity, venture capitalists, and banks beginning to put that money in, encouraged by the demand signal to make this happen. And then if we can't build it in Canada, those international organizations, increasingly we're seeing working with the EU and the ESA about how we can work together as part of a international collaboration around partnering. So we've talked a little bit about why the Arctic's important. We've talked a little bit about the space value chain, and now we're talking about those areas, opportunities of investments, which are now beginning to come true. So if you think about the space assets that actually enable Arctic sovereignty, I've put a couple of this slide here, and I'll talk a little bit about them. I mean, space domain awareness, we heard from the previous two speakers about the ability to track and identify elements in space. So setting up sensors, setting up the ability to track and understand what's coming, needs to be working with space communications. We saw the investment with the ESCAPE program, and that is the ability to communicate with low latency across this vast remote space. And also, in addition to the satellite for the military in the Arctic, is also critically important for those that live there, and those are going to be working there as well. We talk about ISR, or intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. This is to monitor both defense and security lenses, and also to understand where we are seeing environmental changes, as I talked around climate change, or where we might see things opening up in terms of rich minerals, and the ability to support disaster recovery as it requires. Domestic launch, talked about that quite a bit, the criticality of that. And then I'll go on to cyber, which we haven't really talked about. As General Horner mentioned, it's all about maneuverability and having the upper hand. The ability to completely invest into cyber and increasingly quantum communications is going to be critical to sustain not just the assets up there, but the protection of those assets against adversaries who will try and hack them, and that data that's coming down to Earth, so we have the reliability of it. And then the final thing in terms of the investment, we've seen it with the North Operation Support Hubs, is the ability to leverage the traditional knowledge of those that have lived in the Arctic for millennia, and who actually understand both how to operate in the Arctic, how to live in the Arctic, and how to use the Arctic sustainability. So these investments, and a lot of them, as I've put in here, are being realized through the Defence Industrial Strategy and through the Borealis program, which is putting money in from the government and being able to stimulate a lot of people in this room. So I'm going to begin to sort of conclude a little bit here, because I know we want to get on to the panel and other great topics. So this is not going to happen unless our procurement is improved. It is improving, and we've seen how Defence Industrial Strategy is putting the model together about this build, partner, buy. But to be build is where you're going to be sovereign, and where you're going to build and sovereign is where those gaps are the most critical, where Canada doesn't have that now. Launch is probably the most obvious one, but there are others up there about how we can really protect the Arctic in Canada and look after our interest. The second thing, which we've touched a little bit on today, is that talent. We've talked a little bit about the academia, but this goes further into higher education and even into schools. The skill sets that are required, I think 25,000, General Horner spoke, that number can double, but it's only going to double if we get people interested in space and space disciplines, everything from engineering through to data analytics, in order to work with those to get that steady mathematical STEM talent people coming through that are actually going to be able to sustain and be there. Then you have firms such as myself who are being part of these consortiums and conveners that bring this together to enable it to happen, where we can help those small startups through to those major primes and link them to the requirements of defence. And then finally is the investment forward. The call to arms about keeping these companies in Canada requires private investment and venture capitalists here. So my final recommendations are, we still don't have a cabinet-level authority, it's Canadian Space Council, that's aligned to the DIS and the DIA. We still haven't really moved as far as we'd like around making the DIS viable for here. They're the starting point, but this is our opportunity to collectively come together and demonstrate the why about this. And then finally is to look through that supply chain. Space can be a great economic multiplier if we can keep that sovereign supply chain here in Canada. So thank you for listening today. For those that want a copy of the point of view, happy to give them, say it's been updated. It's encouraging to see how it's been updated with the investment, and I look forward to engaging with you many later. Thank you.